Hey, this is Gayle, and welcome to a very messy situation here because I have been doing all of the things and testing, and I know that you're going to have a lot of fun this month with our Footloose Friday featuring the number 43 Couching Foot. Yeah, I've made you a design that looks like crochet. Now, before you start saying, oh, how creative I am or whatever, zip it. I got this idea from a company called Leeds Studio based in Seoul, Korea. And I thought, you know what? I want to do one of their designs. I aspire to do that, but I want to just test a quick little thing that I digitized in my BERNINA embroidery software to see how this is really going to look. So I'm going to just give you a quick tutorial briefly on the computer with how I use my BERNINA software to create this design. But we're going to do a lot of testing and so forth. So if you're new to Footloose Friday, this is the way we roll. So you're watching this video for free. This lives on YouTube, no big deal, right? But if you go to BERNINA of Naperville.com and you search Footloose Friday, put it in your cart and purchase it. It's only $15. You're going to get this interactive presentation deck that I'm working from emailed to you with the links, with the downloads of the free designs that I've made for you, with the elements and all of those things that it took to make our swatches and our sample. And also I give you a link to Lead Studio website if you want to give their stuff a try. And then of course, the video is also embedded in the handout in case you forgot where you stumbled upon this video. Make sense? All right, so please check that out. And yeah, let's stop talking and get over to the computer and see what we're doing.
So I'm viewing the presentation deck that I talked about here. Here are some of our little samples that I tried, and this is what the number 43 couching foot looks like. The project that I'm going to be making for you is a plant hanger. Now, full transparency here, I initially designed it to be like a crocheted hat, but it took a lot more yarn than I thought. So we're going to make three of these and make our little macrame-inspired plant hanger rather than a hat. And I'm calling this a very special episode of Footloose Friday. And that's because normally I have you create a pennant from what we make. So if you wanted to just stitch one of these things out, it could hang like a pennant, but it's intended to be a plant hanger. Right. So another reason why you want to purchase the Footloose Friday and get access to this interactive presentation deck is your special code for 25% off your number 43 free couching foot. We do this on every featured foot every month. So when you get your interactive handout, the code will not be blacked out like it is here. I have some helpful tutorials embedded within this presentation deck, and all of them revolve around the couching foot number 43. This one is a tutorial from our embroidery sampler in 2020, and basic couching and embroidery is another one of our early videos, but I still find it to be relevant and important. Bernina's blog, which is weallsew.com, has a ton of blog posts about the number 43 foot. So you can see here, each one of these is a separate project put together by Bernina brand ambassadors and Bernina education staff. So hopefully by clicking on some of these, you will also be inspired for some other creative options with the Bernina number 43 foot. So I mentioned in the intro that my inspiration was Lead Studio, and I have a link to them right here. And you just click that, and it takes you over to their website here. And they have all different types of things from crochet, cross stitch, freestanding lace, some 3D stuff, and more. So check them out, and I think their prices are very reasonable. Let's go down to some of their freestanding lace, and you can see there's some cute stuff, some cute designs. And although in some of their Instagram videos, they're using other brands than Bernina, but they are featuring a Bernina 880 in some of their Instagram reels. And then the Lead Studio logo here in the presentation deck We'll send you right to their Instagram page so you can see there's their 880 and there's some of their other options. These are just kind of the fun things I watch at night when I can't sleep. And this class is really more about using the foot in the embroidery than it is about trying to get you to make something from scratch that looks just like this. I mean, why reinvent the wheel when you can simply visit their site and download the digital file, right? So, what I want you to learn about this class is all of the different types of yarn that you can use with your number 43 foot, like you see in this picture, and then how to choose your yarns, how to pick the thread, and how to hoop up the stabilizer in order to create this. Let's talk a little bit about some of the supplies. I'm using Aquamesh wash away stabilizer, and it's one layer of that hooped up in either my large hoop, my medium square hoop, or the maxi hoop. I like to use the multiple spool rack for my thread, and I decided to use Ceracore thread to match my yarn color. That is a 50 weight polyester thread. Some other things that you want to pick up is a single cone spool stand. This is the Nifty Notions one. We carry these at the store. And you're probably going to want to pick up maybe a little clay pot that's about 5.5 inches or 5 inches in diameter, and a ball winder and swift, and a little yarn bowl. If you don't have these things, don't rush out and grab them, but it really helps when you put your yarn onto the spool stand. So let's go over to the drawing board and look at some of the yarns that I had in my stash and how they're going to work with this number 43 foot. Let's have a little chat about yarn, starting with how the yarn comes on a skein. So, for instance, this is a skein of yarn that I would need to use a ball winder and a swift to get it into a configuration that looks something like this. You might also get yarn that's already on a skein that's sort of wound, and that might be something that looks like this. So this, you kind of dig in there and you find the end and it can kind of pull out like like this, right? And then this could be a whole class on just different yarns. So there's worsted weight, which is kind of what this is. This is a little on the thin side. This is also a worsted, but a little on the thin. And then there's some thicker stuff. This is cotton. This is wool. This is alpaca. This is wool. This is alpaca. And this is silk and a wool blend. This is cotton. So there's all different types of fiber out there. There's even our La Espiga, which is a nylon cord. Now, this is tried and true in our Bernina machines using the number 43 couching foot. But I wanted something softer. I really wanted to emulate the look of crochet. So I decided to go into my knitting box and find some appropriate yarns. I did some samples. I did one out of this. I did one out of this. And then I have a skein that's not here because I used an entire one skein to make our project, which we'll get to in just a moment. So our foot looks like this, and it comes with a wire threader because you thread your yarn through the hole right there, then down through the center hole in there, and then it holds it in place so it can stitch the fiber of whatever you're using down. Now this hole is about 2.5 millimeters in diameter, which means that if the yarn doesn't fill the hole nicely, you might miss it. If the yarn is too thick, it's not going to move freely and it's going to get stuck. So number 43 is appropriate for what I'm showing you here. So like I said, this is a little on the thin side when we do this. So, you might, this might be better suited for you with another foot, but you have to just try, and I can't give you a secret recipe other than trial and error. This stuff is thinner, but if you look at it unwound, it's kind of fuzzy, so it catches the fiber without any problems. This is really dense, the La Espiga, and so it is pretty much the size of that hole. So there's just all kinds of like experiments that you can do. So put your hat on of something that you make might not go in the museum, but try with little swatches, and you're going to pretty much know about 300 stitches into the design if the thread or yarn that you're using is a go or a no-go. So let's look at some of my experiments. Why don't you learn from my mistakes here? So this guy here was made with this yarn. And this would be lovely. I have no problems with this, but this was my experiment. And what was bad about my experiment? Well, I tried to make it way too big. You don't really need to experiment on something this size, but nonetheless, I was also trying to figure out if I wanted to make a pennant for this class or whatever. So some of the things that were going wrong with this is that I just didn't have enough stitching and enough structure to this. It's very wispy. It doesn't feel like crochet at all. It feels more like um, some sort of tatting. I don't know. It just did not come out right. The order was messed up and whatever. But this is still my design that I'm going to give you. I'm giving you some elements to make something, but it just wasn't quite complete. So then I decided that I was going to do a little bit more stitching. So this is still the same yarn, but this time I have way more little back and forth stitches here to create, that triple crochet or whatever. And then also I have stitching that goes here and over and back 2 times. So that really creates a nice solid piece to stitch on. Then I made sure that I adjusted my piece so that every point goes above a row and every point goes below a row. So everything's held together and it really looks like authentic crochet. So this is just one style of crochet. There are so many different kinds. This is just what I tried to come up with to show you this foot, okay? So after I did that, I got adventurous and I decided that I was going to try a variegated, which is what's right here. So I used this to go with this. And this came out pretty cute. I like it. I'd probably save this for like a little mug rug or something like that. The only thing about it being variegated is because I have those lines. I in this file, this was still an experiment, I put an additional row of stitching on top. It looked very authentic on this one, but because of the variation in the yarn, this is just not how this would look if this were actually crocheted. So I needed to do some work if I was going to use the variegated yarn. With that said, I decided, well, a granny square really has a look that's more like this. Now, I'm not giving you this file because it's not perfected yet. I'd like to do a lot more testing and a lot more playing around, but I thought I'd show you the sample and the journey that I'm going on in creating these. And also, let's look at the back side of these. You can see that I used isocord 40 weight teal thread to kind of match the overall look of this. And you can kind of see that a little bit better on the back sides of these pieces. This one I used Cerulean, which is a very, very, very thin 60 weight polyester thread in the top and bottom. But what happened is when I switched to a heavier yarn, this is our work in progress here for making our faux macrame plant hanger, I made it really thick because I wanted it to be more robust, and also the yarn itself was heavier. The thin thread couldn't hold up, so this was stitched with Ceracore. We use it for the serger, but it can also be used for Freemotion quilting and all kinds of stuff. So the Ceracore polyester 50 weight thread. It didn't skip a beat. There was no thread breakage. There was no anything. It was just perfect. So That's what I'm recommending. I think it would have worked quite lovely with the yarn. Also, the sheen of the Ceracore thread is going to match the yarn a little bit better. Okay, so what are we working with here for stabilizer? I'm using Aquamesh Wash Away Stabilizer, and I'm using, the sample, the little 5-inch works out quite well in your medium square clamp hoop. And you might say, well, that's pretty big for a 4-inch or 5-inch piece, right? Well, the issue is this number 43 foot, when we use it for embroidery, see how big the base of that foot is? You're going to lose some perimeter on the design. So I always like to go up a little bit larger than I think I need. For this, the pennant shapes here, you're going to need at least a maxi hoop, which means you're going to need to get a 7 series machine for this exercise. Or you just stitch the smaller squares if you have a 5 series. Of course, if you have a 990 like I do, you have access to that giant hoop. So imagine what you could do in that, right? Unfortunately, I didn't have enough of the same yarn of anything to do something huge in that, but I've got some other ideas for this project. So I'm not going to really go into too much detail about how I made your designs. We're going to go over to the computer in just a minute. We're focusing more on how to use this foot. However, I know that you like this technique and you're interested to learn more. So what I'd like to do is invite you to take a Zoom course where I will show you how to digitize this pattern. And I think that that's something that you might enjoy if you have the Bernina embroidery software. If you don't have the software, that class is not going to work out for you. So let's start first by making a thread cradle to thread the number 43 foot. So all I did was cut off about 20 inches of my isocord thread, and we're going to meet these two edges of thread together just like so, and we're going to feed this through the foot. Let's go over to the machine to do this properly.
So my machine is threaded with the isocord thread in the top and bottom. And then here's my thread cradle. And sometimes I just take a little bit of spit action to it. And we're going to fit the two ends through our foot. Like that. And then we're going to feed them down into the hole of the foot. Honestly, I like this better than the wire because the thread cradle is bendier. So then I can put my foot on, grab the end of my yarn and feed it through this loop that's formed. And now I can pull that through my foot like so. I'm using a Bernina 990 for this example, but you can do this on any Bernina embroidery machine that is new enough to take the number 43 foot. That is pretty much anything that's been made in the past 20 years. So this is the design as I digitized it. It is 4 colors. Colors number 1 and colors number 2 are just making a little grid. Color number 3 is making this little chicken feet cross or crochet-esque, macrame-esque design. And then color number 4 is just a strengthening stitch to shore up the square. I did them with color separations, but it really is meant to be stitched all in one thread color.
Now that our machine is all prepped and ready to go for the couching, let's talk a little bit about these files that I've made for you. So I'm using the Bernina 990, but most of the files provided are going to work on any Bernina embroidery machine. I say most files because these up here that are done in the maxi hoop are, because of the field shrinkage and all of that stuff, you pretty much need to have a 7, 8, or 9 series machine in order to stitch those top two. And this one here is the plant hanger strap, and this is the little pennant or the plant holder here. Then we have the other designs for swatches and the elements. And if you download the 4 designs, you're going to get the EXP, INF, BMP, and the Art 90 files. But how did I create them? Let's jump over into the Bernina embroidery software and find out. This is my Bernina embroidery software, Designer Plus. And to create this design, I really only used an open object tool, which is in the digitizing drawer here. So digitize, and then we have open object. For each element, I changed the color just so I can visually see different things. So let's just focus on the unit that is our crochet type design. We don't need to worry at this point with anything other than a single outline stitch and our open object. Essentially, when I start digitizing something, then I need to kind of figure out how far apart I want my little chicken feet or the crochet item, right? So let's say I go over 2 blocks. And if you're curious as to how I turned on my grid, that is right here to show grid. And if you want to set a certain distance for your grid, you can right click on the grid and set it. So like, let's say I'm working on a 1/2 inch grid, I would just change these measurements to 0.5 and 0.5. And then that makes the grid a little bit larger. So let's start again. And then I'm going to left click 2 blocks over. I'm going to go 1.5 blocks down, click back at where I started, about 8 of these, just going across here like this. Another thing I want to do is go to design and make sure that my design is starting at the first stitch of the design and ending at the last stitch. We do that by unchecking start position and end position. Okay, so there's my design. And if I select it, and we want to pay attention to object properties, which is this icon right here. If we look, we can see that we're going to start here and end here. Another thing that you might notice is that my little my little yellow dots here are very jaggedy. So this allows me, now that I'm really zoomed in, to kind of move these guys into position. And I did not do 8, I did 3, I did 7 instead. Just lowering them all together like this. And you can also just left click and pull a guide down from either the side or the top if you want to make sure, for instance, that these are all on a straight line. Do you see that guide there? I can right click on the grid and also say that I want to snap to guides. And see how I move my little guy and it turns red? That means it's right on the guide. So as I go around here adjusting these, this will ensure that they're all even and straight across. Now, my only other challenge here is that I want to kind of have them even. So I want this one to be here, and now we're going to just try to distribute them a little bit. Doesn't have to be perfect. That looks good to me. And then if we zoom in even further here, you can select more than one node at a time by dragging an invisible kind of circle around there. Okay, kind of get them in a little cluster like that. So now this is one element. Now, if we want to string these together, let's make a copy. Did you know that right click and drag makes a copy? So with this in mind, I don't need an element here with an extra line because I've got a line here. So I can go back to reshape and just move this right there. See that? Now I select this and I'm going to move it so it touches that spot right there. And now that's my piece. Now, one of the things, if I really look at this, maybe I don't want these pieces to touch there. If you want them to be kind of spaced further away, then all we're going to do is adjust this line to touch that piece. And what this is doing is it's just going to ensure that it's going to stitch from left to right going in this direction. And then what I want to do is let's select this one again, right here, right click and drag. And I want to do the same thing here, except look at this point, I don't need that line, right? So I can delete that and then move this guy to touch this line. And I don't necessarily, I want that to be longer still. So let's see how we did this over here. We have a little bit of space there. So let's move a little bit of space. Okay, that looks good. So that means we're going to select this and move that node over like so. I'm also going to right click on my hoop and make sure that it auto centers it. And now let's view all. So now there's a little row of crocheting, right? So another thing that we want to do is we want to offset the next row. And one of the things that we can do is we can select all. I do that by pressing Control A on the keyboard and then right clicking and dragging this up to the next portion there. And one of the things I do with this is I want to center it kind of so that I have a significant amount of overhang like that. Because remember, this is a stitching line and I want this to be covered up. So we're going to go from one row to this row and so forth and up. And this takes a lot of tweaking and everything like that. But I'm just going to go and another thing to also notice, do you see how we went from here and then we have a jump stitch that's going over here? Well, let's eliminate that by mirroring our design. And do you see now it jumps from here to there? We're not carrying a thread all the way across there like that. Another thing you can do, and this is the very simple way to do it, is to pick a new color, use your open object tool, make sure we're still on the single stitch, and we're going to digitize a line. Insert this using color film And if color film isn't open, you open it up here at the top. And we're going to move this up so that it is the first. It stitches after the third piece and then change the color back to navy or color number 1. So now that we have this unit, let's go ahead and view to hoop. I can select this guy and we can control, or we can right click and drag. And now we're going to place this into position just like we placed the other one. And I tweak with my arrows on my keyboard. And then now we have another situation over here where we have another one of those jump stitches where we could digitize. So once again, I'm going to change to my blue color and my open object tool, and I move this up 6 spaces, and then change it to blue. And now look at it in artistic view, and let's simulate by playing it. Perfect. So this obviously isn't a square and everything, but I did a lot of tweaking with this after I made all of my little crochet feet, let's say. So then once I did that, I used my open object tool and a different color, and I made these go tips there. And I went down here and just below the tip, and then I want again. Something like that. Now we can select our and change some of our nodes so they go within this area like that. Okay. And then I want to just show by color now. and take blue and have that stitch first. Now finally, I'm going to pick green and finally, I'm going to deselect, pick green, pick my back stitch because I want something that's got a little bit more vavoom, default settings, and now I'm going to pick open object, or at this point I can even do closed object, back stitch, green, and now this is how I made our sample. So let's look at our sample, which is this guy here, and this has been adjusted, and this is what you're going to see us stitch out. So you have this, but one thing that I'm giving you that I think you'll find very helpful are pennant elements. You have an element like this one where, in this example, I have a file where it starts and ends here. It starts and ends here. And each one of these has a different purpose. And you can kind of play around with them, or you could just take one and build off of it like I did in this example. But I recommend that you take our class that we have on how to make these. It's a longer class, it's hands-on, you can play around and everything. But just to learn how to use the foot and everything, use my little granny square block or the hanger straps or even the pennant file, which is this one. Finally, one thing I want to kind of show you, and this is more of a visual thing than it is for anything else, but if you're using a running straight stitch, like we did for color 2 and color 1, you can select it and tell the machine that you mean for this stitch to be couched with the number 43 foot. And look, it looks thicker and thicker. Now, it won't register for our number 3rd color, which I made to be a back stitch, but it still will couch. I hope that's not confusing for you, but if you don't want to do the back stitching, you can do single and then look. And then this kind of simulates what that's going to look like. And then you'll also notice here, it even will define on our machine or on any color separations that that's meant to be done with cording. So thought you would like to know that. I don't do that. I kind of know that I want this to be a couching stitch. So your files that you're getting do not have that element in them, but I'm just showing you that that is a feature of the Bernina embroidery software.
With my stitch summary, I am wanting to pick single color now that it's not going to stop after every color change. And then my quilt settings are off, thread away is off, and thread cutting is off. And I don't have any use for basting, so I'm good to go with this. I'm going to attach my hoop. And now it starts at the bottom right corner. And I'm just going to babysit my machine, but I don't have to do that much with it. So I'm going to go ahead and press the go button. And every once in a while, you may have to give it a little encouragement here to come out of the yarn ball. I wanted to point something out to you. If you look right here, see how that didn't get quite up there with its friends there? Kind of missed. Well, that's because as I was stitching, it was pulling hard out of the yarn. I kind of wanted to just see how it would behave naturally without like feeding slack to the yarn. But this is what happens if it gets too tight from your source that you're pulling your yarn from. So it got too tight to really catch properly. Now, I have put some fail safes in this design, so you're not even going to notice that that happened when this comes back over, but I just don't want you to be alarmed if something like that happens to you.
So now that we're on this last pass, what we're seeing is this final piece that I digitized as a back stitch. And this is that stitch that doesn't read in the Bernina embroidery software if you're trying to visually tell it that you've used yarn or whatever. But this is just giving a little bit of different texture to the yarn as it goes around. So it has more of that edge has been crocheted type of look. So this is just kind of creating a different texture. And this is going to be our last pass. And one of the things to keep in mind with this is once this stops, we can just trim any of those tails. This thing is stitched down really well.
So here's our little, I just trimmed this in the hoop just to pull it out, right? Because we don't need a ton of extra wash away stabilizers. So I'm just gonna take our little indiscretion here and trim it. It is really stitched down, so don't worry about anything falling apart. And then I'm just gonna trim it close like this. There we go. And now we're ready to give this a bath. And there's something satisfying about seeing the backside of this, and you can really see the digitizing and what is the needle penetration marks are created to make this where we don't even really see the top part of the thread. It's going to be even more hidden once we give this a little bath. And I'm using like a little bit colder than room temperature water, and that's simply because I don't want to felt this wool. I want to get it too hot. And I also don't want to be tempted to put this in a dryer or anything like that because I don't want it to shrink. And I don't soak it. I literally just rinse this under the water. The Aqua Mesh stabilizer is, it dissolves relatively easily, so you don't want to agitate either if you're using wool, because if you agitate, that will also cause it to felt up, and you don't want that in this situation. Okay, so now we're just going to let it here. This is quartz, so I'm just going to leave it here on my quartz countertop to dry.
I just wanted to show you the difference between my practice one and my perfected one. And this looks much nicer to me than this with that interruption there with that extra stitching. So this is what you're getting for your free download. So let's talk about the project. So the project for me was stitching out your 3 pennant/plant hanger pieces, just like you saw us stitch that sample. And we're going to be, the 3 of those things take about an hour to stitch 3 pieces, and that's on jackrabbit mode. But once you stitch those out and you go through the washing process and you lay them flat to dry and just leave them be, we're going to switch our machine to regular sewing mode. And pick a zigzag stitch and
we're going to stitch these together to form a 3D shape. So I've put on my number 10 edge stitch foot, and it's the 10D, which has the dual feed. And I've switched over to my sewing mode. And I'm using a zigzag stitch along with the actual thread that I used to sew the yarn down. So I'm butting these up together and I'm gliding that middle guide, that bar here on my number 10D foot. And then I'm just going to stitch. Obviously I have my zigzag needle plate on. And I do want to reverse here. There we go. And this is at the default width of 3.6. And then I'm going to back stitch here. And now let's cut. Okay, so now that's together. And honestly, you can't even tell that I stitched that. Okay, and these are, this is right side up. And you can tell there is a difference. There's a little bit more texture. You can see the stitches on the wrong side of this. So we want the fluffier, smoother side up when we do this. And so we're going to line this up just like we did the other piece. Back tacking right to the very edge. There we go. And I want to kind of make sure that I'm lining this up and it meets together nicely. So, and it's perfect because they were embroidered perfectly. When I dissolved the water, I used just lukewarm water, not hot water, because this is wool. So now what I want to do is cut. And now we're getting there. We're getting there. So now we're going to be sewing this piece together here like this. And I am going to turn this inside out, or like turn it like this, right? To try to very carefully get that together, get that started up here like so. And we're gonna back tack. And now let's continue. And you are just gonna have to trust the process here. Back tack and cut. So now we're going to trim those threads and turn it inside out.
so before we can see how the pot looks in our plant hanger, I created a couching design that goes into the maxi hoop, and this is creating a triple couched reinforced strap. And you are going to be able to make 120 inches of it based on this embroidery file. And you're going to divide that 120 inches by 3. So you're going to cut 3 40-inch pieces. And then those pieces get folded in half so that you can feed them through the quote unquote crocheted part at each seam. And then you have 3 seams. So then you take those pieces and bring them up together to form a knot so that you can hang your pot. And I recommend a little tassel at the end. I did not make a tassel. I left mine plain for now, but you can embellish this however you want.
Here's my plant, guaranteed to stay like this forever because it is 100% fake. Listen, I have 2 plants that are actually real, that I water and I baby, and I'm trying really hard for them not to die. But this, you know what? It looks just like the real thing with these tired old eyes. Well, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like it, don't forget to check out our BERNINA of Naperville YouTube channel. It's easy. It's youtube.com/BERNINA of Naperville, and there you can like, comment, and subscribe. And also, make sure you hop on over to BERNINAofNaperville.com and check out when we have some Zoom classes where we go more in depth on digitizing this kind of macrame-inspired project. Until then, happy embroidery and just go out there, create, and have fun. See ya.